Jadi dia 2 tahun selama di USA, dia mendapatkan ijazah MA. Kemudian dia mengambil doktor PhD dengan tambahan 3 tahun lagi.
His friends from Wisconsin say he loved JFK, democracy, and the American way of life. But Ibnu's fate was to be sealed by the politics of his day.
Tapi karena ada konfrontasi antara Amerika dengan Indonesia pada waktu itu, jadi semua mahasiswa yang di Amerika, Indonesia ditarik lagi ke Indonesia semuanya, termasuk kakak saya, berikut dengan keluarganya.
Returning home to a country being polarized by Cold War politics, Ibnu gets a university job by joining the Indonesian Graduates Association, a group associated with the Communist Party. Tensions were also rising in the countryside where the PKI had been enforcing President Sukarno's land reform program. When the UN backs the formation of Malaysia, Sukarno withdraws Indonesia in protest and declares he'll join an axis with Peking and Hanoi. President Sukarno has now gone too far for the West. For nearly 15 years, he'd balanced both sides of the Cold War. By 1965, Sukarno appeared to be siding decisively with the communists. The West, with Machiavellian logic, hoped the Indonesian army would step in. If the PKI mounted an unsuccessful coup, it would provide the perfect excuse.
Certainly, 1965 was the height of the Cold War. Vietnam was very important for the Americans, and the war wasn't going too well. The Marines had landed, but they had taken some bad reverses. And so when it appeared that at the back door, Indonesia was about to go completely into the communist orbit, there was a lot of concern. There was a lot of fear.
Then Sukarno appears to collapse at a public reception, raising the stakes even further.
There were rumors that his kidney was failing, and of course put the army on high alert.
It did raise questions. If he's sick, what will happen if he dies? Who will move? Who will take over? The PKI do it by themselves? Will the army do it? Will God knows who else do it?
Rumors circulate that an Army Council of Generals, backed by the CIA, is plotting to overthrow Sukarno.
Army was clearly keen if Sukarno became incapacitated, they would seize power.
Ani raga patut waspada. Apa angon waspada darmo ne jalan gisi. Angon munahang sahanane ngomo darawake behewa ratu. Cicing boros. Dugas pidan sing kita ane tatak tutuk rakyat tadi sengsara lantas tuh.
On the 30th of September 1965, Indonesia is changed forever. This 4-hour film is General Suharto's version of the events of that night. It was shown every year on all television stations while he was in power. It portrays junior army officers supposedly under control of the communist PKI, kidnapping and killing the head of the army and 5 senior generals. General Suharto puts down the so-called 30th of September movement and heroically saves the nation. It's all over in less than 24 hours.
My God, they said, well, they've done it. And then the air attaché came running in and said, The servants in his house said they were shooting out in back of his house. Some general got hit, they said. Turns out to be Panjaitan, who lived right behind him there. So, well, this was beginnings of a very upsetting environment. But we didn't know what the heck was going on.
The morning of October 1st, when Time magazine called me and said, "Don, there's been a tremendous coup. We don't know what's going on, but we know that 6 of the top Indonesian generals have been killed in this slaughter overnight. And we don't know whether Sukarno is behind it, what's going on, but you're the only person, the only journalist in Hong Kong that has a visa."
3 days after the murders, the bodies of the dead generals are discovered in a well. President Sukarno has appointed General Suharto to restore security. Suharto personally witnesses the exhumation. Suharto also closes down the civilian press. The army-controlled newspapers run false but graphic stories telling how communist women had tortured and mutilated the generals, gouging out their eyes, cutting off their sexual organs, and dancing over their bodies. The Indonesian Communist Party, the PKI, is blamed for the abortive coup.
The first big event I covered in Jakarta was the funeral of the 6 generals. We had heard tales about the way this slaughter had been done, the mutilation of the generals, how they had been tortured and killed. And we had no way of knowing it. We didn't speak to any eyewitnesses. And so if the army put out with authority that these bodies were mutilated, it became the perception.
If the Communist Party was responsible, Western diplomats could not understand why it would mount such an ineffective operation.
I would have said it made no sense at that time because the communists were moving very effectively. They were achieving their objectives by other means. And I would have said, why in the heck should they mount a coup?
It was known that the murders were carried out by junior army officers calling themselves the 30th of September movement. But the question of who, if anyone, was pulling the strings behind these officers was much less certain. Nevertheless, the diplomatic cables do reveal the West was keen for Suharto and the army to drive home its advantage in this brutal Cold War struggle.
In the 3 or 4 weeks following the putsch, Norman Redaway put together a radio program which was then sent back into Jakarta and broadcast to Indonesian people, in the Indonesian language of course, purporting to be an Indonesian-sourced program. They were putting back a highly coloured version of the story that Suharto and his men were putting about.
The British-made propaganda program called The Voices from the Well was broadcast from a radio station set up next door to Suharto's house. The army set up a new tabloid to spread stories of the bestiality of the PKI. They emphasized that women will sink to utmost depravity under the godless communist influence.
It didn't have to take great skills for the army to whip up the sentiments against the communists. At the same time, I think the whole party was still left in the lurch because they still were in the mode of the parliamentary road to power. So they were essentially defenseless and armed without arms. Exactly the situation I was worried about.